Welcome to episode 42 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we will continue with the epic story of King Oedipus, with the story of the discovery. For many years the dreadful secret remained hidden, and Oedipus, who was a good and just king, though he had his faults, ruled Thebes together with Jocasta, and was loved and honored by his subjects. But in due time the gods sent a plague upon the land, which wrought havoc among the people, and against which no remedy could prevail. The Thebans regarded this pestilence as a punishment, and sought protection from their king, who, they believed, was a favorite of the immortals. Men and women, the aged and the children, came to the palace in a long procession led by priests with olive branches in their hands, seated themselves all about and on the steps of the altar standing before the palace, and waited for the king to appear. When Oedipus heard their clamor, he came out and asked its cause, and why the entire city fumed with the smoke of offerings and resounded with lament. The eldest among the priests answered in behalf of all. "You can see for yourself, O master," he said, "what wretchedness we are forced to endure. The hills and the fields are burned with drought and heat. The plague is raging in our homes. The city cannot lift its head through the waves of blood and destruction. And so, we have come to take refuge with you, our beloved king. Once before, you freed us from the tyranny of the asker of riddles. Surely this did not come to pass without the help of the gods, and so we put our trust in you, believing that either through gods or men you will find help for us again." "My poor children," Oedipus replied, "I know the cause of your prayers. I know that you are wasting with disease. But my heart is sadder than yours, for I do not mourn this one or that one, but I mourn the entire city. To me, your coming is no sudden awakening as though I had slept. I have brooded over your distress and cast about for some cure, and I think I have found it at last, for I have sent my own brother-in-law Creon to Delphi, to the oracle of Apollo, to ask by what deed or what other means the city can be set free." Even as Oedipus spoke, Creon appeared in the throng and reported the oracle to the king before all the people. But it was not very consoling. "The god bade us thrust out an evil the land is harboring," said Creon, "and not to cherish that which no purification can atone. The murder of King Laius weighs as blood guilt upon the land." Oedipus, who did not guess that the old man he had killed was the very one for whose sake the wrath of the gods had visited upon his subjects, had them tell the story of the murder, but still his spirit was blind to the truth. He declared that he regarded it as his duty to deal with this matter himself, and dismissed the assembled people. Then he had proclaimed throughout the land that anyone who knew of the murderer of King Laius should report all that he had learned, that if one dwelling in another land knew anything, the city of Thebes would give him thanks and reward for his information, but that he who kept silence to shield a friend or to hide his complicity should be excluded from all religious services, from the sacrificial feast, and even from intercourse with his fellow citizens. As for the murderer himself, he cursed him with awful imprecations, and called down on him misery and need for all the days of his life, and in the end utter destruction. He was not to escape disaster, even if he were hiding in the palace itself. In addition to all this, Oedipus dispatched 2 messengers to the blind seer Tiresias, who almost matched Apollo in his power to probe the unknown and behold the unseen. Soon after, the aged seer came before the king and the assembly of the people. A boy led him by the hand. Oedipus told him of the misfortune which had fallen on the country and begged him to use his gift of prophecy to help them find the murderer of King Laius. But Tiresias broke into lament, and stretching his hand out toward the king as if to ward off some terrible thing, he exclaimed, "Awful is the knowledge that brings sadness to him who knows. Let me go home. O king, bear your burden, and let me bear mine." These veiled words only made Oedipus more and more insistent, and the people themselves fell on their knees to beg the seer to speak. When he refused to make his meaning clear, Oedipus grew angry and taunted Tiresias with being the confidant, or perhaps even the helper of the murderer, saying that only the old man's blindness kept him from thinking that he himself had committed the crime. The accusation loosened the prophet's tongue. "Oedipus," he cried, "obey the orders you yourself proclaim. Do not speak to me. Do not speak to any one of your people. If it is you who are the evil that taints the city, yes, it is you who murdered the king and live in guilty union with those dear to you." And still the mind of Oedipus was closed to the truth. He called the soothsayer a knave and a trickster, and accused both him and Creon of plotting against the throne, of weaving a network of lies in order to drive him who had liberated the city from power. But Tiresias replied by calling him unambiguously now the slayer of his father and the husband of his mother, and then groped for his little guide's hand and went away in anger. Meantime, Creon had heard of the accusations launched against him and hastened to confront Oedipus. A violent quarrel broke out between them, and Jocasta's attempt to calm them were of no avail. They parted unreconciled, rankling with bitterness and hatred. Jocasta herself was blinder than the king himself. Hardly had she heard that Tiresias had pointed him out as the slayer of Laius, when she protested against the seer and his vaunted powers. "It just goes to show," she said scornfully, "how little these prophets know. Take an example. An oracle once told my husband Laius that he would die at the hands of his son, but actually he was killed by robbers at a forking of the road, and our only son was tied by the feet and exposed in a waste mountain region when he was only 3 days old. That is how oracles are fulfilled." The queen laughed mockingly, but her words had a very different effect from that she had intended. "At the crossroads?" Oedipus asked, his heart shaken with fear. "Did you say that Laius fell at the crossroads? How old was he then? How did he look?" Jocasta answered readily, unaware of her husband's agitation. "He was tall, and his hair was just turning white. He was not unlike you." And now Oedipus was seized with real terror. It was as if a flash of lightning had split the darkness of his mind. "It is not Tiresias who is blind," he cried. "He sees, he knows." And though in his soul he recognized the truth, he asked question after question, hoping for answers which would prove his discovery a mistake. But the replies only established more firmly, and at last he learned that a servant had escaped, come home and told of the murder, that when Oedipus ascended the throne, this man had begged to be set as far as possible from the city, to the farthest pastures of the king. Now he was summoned, but just as he arrived, a messenger for Corinth entered the palace to announce to Oedipus the death of Polybus, his father, and call him to the vacant throne. When she heard this, the queen said triumphantly, "O divine oracle, where are the truths you utter? The father Oedipus was supposed to slay has just died peacefully of old age. But King Oedipus, who had greater reverence for the gods, thought otherwise. He wanted to believe that Polybus was his father, yet could not bring himself to think that an oracle might be false. He hesitated to go to Corinth for still another reason. There was the second part of the oracle to consider. Merope, his mother, was living, and fate might drive him into marriage with her. What doubts he still had were dispelled by the messenger, the very herdsman who had many years ago on Mount Cithaeron had accepted the infant from a servant of Laius, and loosed the thongs which bound his pierced feet. It was an easy matter for him to prove that Oedipus, though heir to the throne of Corinth, had been only the foster son of Polybus. And when the king of Thebes now asked for the servant who had delivered him to the herdsman, he discovered that he had escaped death when King Laius was murdered and had been tending the king's cattle at the borders of the realm. When Jocasta heard this, she left her husband and the assembled people with loud wails of despair. Oedipus was still trying to evade the inevitable, explained her going in this way. "She is afraid," he said to the people. "She's a proud woman and fears that I may turn out to be of humble birth. As for me, I regard myself as the son of good fortune, and I am not ashamed of a family tree such as that." Now the herdsman was brought, and the messenger from Corinth at once recognized him as the servant who had put the child in his hands. The old man paled with terror and stammered denials, but when Oedipus had him fettered and threatened him, he told the truth, that Oedipus was the son of Laius and Jocasta, that the oracle predicting he would slay his father had caused them to expose the child, but that he, out of pity, had saved his life. And here I end my tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.